Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Topic of discussion. As the picture suggests, this is Greece, and I'm sure everyone has heard over the last few days, months, and probably even years about Greece, and everyone has some form of idea about what's going on there. But today, Rajeev is just going to delve a lot deeper into what the crisis is and what are the ramifications for it, and I think you all will really enjoy it. So, Rajeev, to you.
Good evening. Around 4 years back, 3 to 4 years back, there was an acronym which had formed in the financial markets. It was called PIGS. Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece and Spain. So these were considered to be the highly indebted countries of the Eurozone. And there was a fear as to what would happen to the global financial markets and what would happen to the banking system and so on and so forth. And we seem to have tided over that problem. Things seem to have been resolved. And again, like a movie sequel which keeps coming, Doom 1, Doom 2, Doom 3, Doom 4, we have Greece 1, Greece 2, Greece 3, so this thing keeps coming back at us. So all our recommendations so far in all the FOFs that we have been having, we keep saying that ignore macro. So whenever you are looking at stocks, you are effectively talking about ownership of a business, and all these macro events will keep coming. There will be ups and downs, and you have to write it out. There is no other way out, and there is no way of predicting what will happen on the macro scenario. So that is as far as macro goes, and usually we don't have any discussions on the headlines which are occupying our minds of late. The only reason why this gets so much of prominence is that in our minds we have memories of 2008, of the Lehman bankruptcy. And people have this fear, what if there is a contagion? The country may be small, the economy may be small, but what are the implications, who all are exposed, and what are the wider ramifications? So right now we are only talking about Greece. Does it mean that other countries will get involved somewhere down the road, or what happens? Will some banks go bust if something were to happen? So I don't have answers to many of these questions. In fact, at the end of today's talk, you may say that I have answers to none of the questions. But if nothing else, you will look at some nice photographs. So then that in itself is a good thing. And it makes for a very interesting story as to what was the genesis of crisis, how we have come to where we are, who are all the personalities involved, and what is actually happening. So it's a good story if nothing else. So it's a country which has a population probably less than the Mumbai metropolitan region. So that's for perspective. It's in terms of population, it's not among the larger countries of the world. So it's not a China, it's not a US, it's not a India. It's a relatively small country. Land mass is large, maybe equivalent to one of our mid-sized states. The numerator is the GDP of the country. Denominator is GDP of the Eurozone. So it's about 1.5, 1.6% kind of thing of the overall Eurozone economy. So it's not that big in the European context. So if Greece were to be in trouble somewhere down the road, only Greece economy getting affected would not affect European Union or would not affect the global economy broadly. So it's not like US going into recession. It's a small country, as probably most of you already know. And it has a huge debt burden. That debt burden itself, many say, is understated. No one knows the exact number. People say it's, some people say 150% of GDP, some people say 180% of GDP, some people add unfunded liabilities and say it's much larger. So net, the debt is unsustainable. So how did this situation come about, and why is this different from a typical government which has a lot of debt on its books? So if you look at pure debt to GDP ratio, maybe Japan would be equally bad or would be even higher than Greece. This might be a surprising thing for some people, and that leads us to the question as to why are we not talking about Japan and why are we only talking about Greece? And Japanese economy is much larger than that of Greece, so why is that not a cause of global crisis? So this brings us to a situation where we need to have some understanding of the European Union and how that functions in order to understand the problem of Greece. The European Union is a union of different countries in Europe, where all these countries have a common currency, which is the euro, obviously. But each country has its own electorate, its own government, its own budgets, and so on and so forth. So unlike a country which has its own currency, let us say Japan, which has yen, and Japanese debt would be determined in terms of the yen liabilities that they have, and the Central Bank of Japan can create yen out of thin air if that liability has to be met. Unlike that, in the case of Greece, their debt is denominated in a currency which they technically cannot print, or which they are supposedly not allowed to print. So primarily the difference between us as individuals or us as corporations versus sovereigns or versus governments is that when we borrow money, we have to pay back in the same currency, and we cannot create currency at home. Governments can create their own currency, or central banks can create their own currency, which does not apply in the case of Greece. So here it's a situation like, let us say in India we have a state of Bihar, hypothetically, which has borrowed a lot of money, but Bihar on its own cannot print the Indian rupees. That power is with the Reserve Bank of India, and one state unilaterally cannot create money. So we are in that kind of a situation as far as Greece goes. They do not have the option of devaluing their currency and getting rid of their debt. So even a basket case like Zimbabwe has that option because they have their own currency. Here that situation does not arise. And how does a country come into the Eurozone? So since countries are not allowed to create their currency, there are strict guidelines in the European Union that your budget deficit should not be more than this, your overall debt level should not be higher than this, and there are all sorts of, your inflation rate should be in control. There are all sorts of guidelines which are required to be met before a country is admitted to the European Union. So the entry of Greece into European Union is a very interesting story by itself. It's a story where the country as a whole fudged its books of accounts in a way that would make Enron proud. So they had a number. Our GDP is this much, our debt is this much. We have to bring down debt to this much level. So they kept on striking out one item after the other. Okay, we need to reduce debt, so all my pension liabilities will not consider, or these things will take off the books, and so on. In fact, situation was so bad that when the government was overthrown and a new government came in to really take stock of the mess, for maybe a few weeks, they did not even know what liability they had. So suddenly someone would raise the hand and say, even this we have promised it, this is an obligation. Then they would write it and add it up to their balance sheet on the liability side. Again, on inflation rate was running far higher than what was required. So they would keep changing the basket of products which would measure the inflation. So every time they would say, oh, which are the commodities which are going up in price, let's exclude those from the consumption basket. Let's put commodities which are not rising in price into the inflation basket. And whatever commodities or whatever services were under the purview of the government, for some time they imposed price cap on that. So they cut electricity rates arbitrarily and they cut some other charges to bring the inflation under control. And a famous investment bank who invariably crops up in such discussions, Goldman Sachs, helped them juggle some of this debt. So Goldman Sachs also did some accounting jugglery and took some debt off Greece's books. So they were able to enter a club which they were not entitled to in the first place. That's the story behind their entry into European Union. So today the reason why people are worried is people are worried not because of the size of Greece, they are worried because of the cascading effect, if any, of a Greece exit. So it's not that Lehman Brothers itself was a very big entity. Lehman Brothers bankruptcy created the panic. One, because people who had lent to it would have to take that much of losses. That is the first order impact and first order panic. The second order panic is that people will start asking who's next, and people will stop lending money to each other, and suddenly liquidity dries up, interest rates shoot up and things like that. So that is the worry that people have. And as I mentioned, the personalities involved are very interesting. So this is the young and dashing Prime Minister of Greece, and in the current disputes all sorts of name calling is happening. So just imagine a borrower calling a lender a criminal. So this guy is going around saying IMF bears criminal responsibility for our troubles. No talk about their own overspending or their own fudging of books a few years earlier, etc. Everyone is to blame for their troubles except for themselves. This guy is the finance minister of the country, and this is how he comes to the cabinet meeting. It's not a picture taken while he's on a vacation or this is him arriving for the Greek cabinet meeting. And both of these people have been elected on the promise of not compromising. So these are the hardliners and they are the left parties of Greece. So when we complain in our own country about the populist policies of, let's say, Jayalalitha, who gives away free rice or all these Amma canteens and cement and all of that. The Greek parties are no different in terms of populism and trying to push the problems behind. They have been elected on the premise that we will not let the Greek population suffer and we will take a very hardline stance against the lenders that are pressurizing us. And the earlier parties have been thrown out, people who are trying to compromise. And on the lending side, you have these grumpy people. So this is the German Prime Minister. This lady is the IMF head, and even she does not have kind things to say about the other party. She says, as IMF, my sympathy is with children in Africa than tax evaders in Greece. So tax evaders and tax evasion is another full story in Greece. So again, the way Greeks evade taxes, it would cause envy among a lot of Indian people if we knew their standards. So, if you look at the Greek economy, I read somewhere 35-40% of the economy is public sector. Public sector is you have a cushy job, fancy salaries or above average salaries, and plus opportunity to make money on the side through illegal gratification. That's 35-40% of the economy. There are some people who are in the formal sector who have salaries which are paid by their employer. They pay TDS like people in India. Those are the only people who pay taxes. Doctors, lawyers, accountants, hairdressers, none of those people. So a huge section of the Greek population is self-employed or who run self-owned businesses. None of those declare any income whatsoever. So how do we estimate how much tax evasion is there in any country? If there is underreporting, how do we actually go around figuring out what is the extent of the problem? So one person did a simple thing. That person said that anyone who borrows money from the bank will have to spend money on their livelihood, on living day to day, on the grocery, utility bills and so on. So there is a low EMI to income ratio, which is a standard ratio accepted world over. So usually it's about 25-30-35% kind of thing. They went around finding out in Greece as to how much is the monthly payment towards loan as compared to the declared income that they have. And they found out ratios like 82% average and going up to 100% and 110%. So if all your money that you are declaring as income, you are paying to the banker, how are you feeding your family and how are you paying your utility bills? So that question goes unanswered. A country with absolutely low level of usage of credit cards or checks and so on. So just like we are fascinated by cash, they are fascinated by cash. And even fancy hotels and fancy restaurants will prefer that you pay by cash and will not give you a receipt or a tax proof receipt at the end of the meal. So that's the way the country runs. And when they actually did a satellite imagery of Athens, a lot of people who were claiming to be poor or who were claiming not to have too much of income, in satellite images and in photographs and all, they found fancy cars over there, swimming pools and all of that. So officially there are only some 300 swimming pools in Athens, but when they did all this imagery, they found a number close to 2000. So that is the kind of thing that happens. Again, when people evade all these taxes, when they have a lot of this cash, what do they do with that cash? Very similar to India, a huge chunk of it goes into real estate. So real estate is a very popular investment vehicle over there where they can put in all this unaccounted money that is there. So one of the biggest reasons for Greece not having enough money or having such high levels of debt is tax evasion. This person is the third guy. This person is in charge of the European Union, who again has exposure to Greek debt. So why does this name keep coming again and again? Why do we again and again keep hearing about Greece? We heard about it in 2011. Why are we again hearing about it? Essentially what has been done so far is they have been kicking the can down the road, saying let's push the problem to the future and let's not address the problem right now. That does not solve the root cause of the problem, it only alleviates the symptoms of the main disease. But I would say that when this thing was done the last time round, it solved a very big problem. Though people may not recognize it today, but it solved a very big problem. Because last time the crisis was there were more countries involved. Number one, like we spoke about the acronym PIGS, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, Spain. Today there is talk about only one country as of now. And the second thing which happened is the liabilities of Greece in the last round of crisis was to global banks and primarily European banks. So if Greece had been allowed to go bankrupt at that time, the banking system would have collapsed. Today, bulk of the liability is to sovereign or quasi-sovereign institutions. Bulk of the liability is to three entities, what are called the Troika. It's IMF, it's European Central Bank and the European Union. As news of this crisis has been going around, Greek citizens have been queuing up outside their banks and withdrawing money in cash, because there is fear that any time capital controls could be imposed and people would be prohibited from withdrawing cash. And it's only because of the help of European Central Bank that the banks in Greece are afloat as of today. So the kicking of the can down the road helped last time round, and today if the default were to happen, the impact would be far lower than what it would have been a few years back. So what's the issue today? The first answer is Greece cannot repay the borrowings that it has today, and no one expects them to pay. That is very clear. No one expects them to pay all the money right away. What the lenders are saying, and when we talk about lender, a large part of it goes to Germany through the European Central Bank or through the European Union. A lot of German funds are there, and of course everyone else in Europe is affected in some way or the other. What the lenders are saying is, forget the past debt that you repay whenever or as and when you are able to pay. We will not charge you a very high level of interest. Interest rates will be kept low. So you repay over next 15 years, 20 years. So they would be willing to extend maturity. There is no problem on that count. The question is, does Greece want to repay at all? Or how much Greece wants to repay. Now, when a country cannot print its own currency, cannot print the currency in which its debt is denominated, the only way it can repay debt is by running what is called a primary budget surplus. A primary budget surplus would mean that the tax revenues that Greece collects from its citizens should be more than the expenditure of the government, and that surplus goes towards servicing of the interest and principal on the loans that the government has. The stance of Greece has been, we are broke, we cannot pay money, so write off a big chunk of what we owe you and allow us to live more or less the way we are living right now. So, a lot of people would think that Greece is completely wrong in this and the lenders are right. The answer is not as clear cut and as simple as that. So I'll give you a simple example. Let us say a family in the past 5 years has been spending all of its monthly income and plus has been spending more by borrowing on credit cards. Now after 5 years, you have to firstly stop the extra spending on credit card. You have to save out of your monthly paycheck and the savings you have to repay to the credit card company. So what applies to this family applies to Greece as a country. Now what may be sensible for a family to do may not necessarily be sensible for a country to do. The reason for that is when the government cuts a lot of expenditure, the economy itself goes down, and when the economy goes down, it in turn reduces the revenue that the government gets from taxation. So then it becomes a vicious cycle of low growth or recession, again tax revenue going down, requiring more cuts, requiring a deeper recession. So Greece is saying austerity won't work. You need to allow us to have some basic level of spending. There are good points on both sides of the argument. The problem why the lenders, or the reason why the lenders are not comfortable is saying that how long can we keep funding you to spend money frivolously, and when will you actually start reforming? So as a symptom, just take a look at this. So the Greece railway has a gross revenue of $100 million, 100 million euros in a year. Their wage bill alone is $400 million. And on top of that, they have other expenses of $300 million, 300 million euros. So revenue 100 million, expenses 700 million. Will they shut down the railways and say let people use buses or whatever else mode of transport because it's not primarily viable, or will they cut salaries? Again, the average salary, this is of all the employees of railways, is 65,000 euros per year, which is quite high, especially when you are in financial trouble. 1 in 2 young people in Greece is unemployed today. This is as far as the young population goes. There are a lot of pensioners in Greece, and up until some time back, pensioners would not only get 12 pension checks in a year, they would get one additional pension check as a bonus. Even after you retire, you get a bonus each year. So, within the European Union, there are some of these Eastern European countries who have slogged to meet all the requirements. They have come in after making a lot of sacrifices. And when they see such kind of overspending, their blood boils because they have put money in the European Central Bank and the European Union, and these Greece fellows are making merry and living it up. So some of the things definitely need correction on the spending side. There's no question about it. The difficulty is that those people have been elected on a populist plan. If you have been elected on a populist plan, then now to make a 180-degree turn and say that we are doing the exact opposite is difficult. In fact, even a small proposal that they made to compromise, this is yesterday or day before yesterday, created a huge uproar in their own country, saying that our parliament will not approve it even if our government signs the deal. So that is the difficulty at Greece. And at the same time, the lender countries are also at the end of their patience, and a deal which is seen as too liberal for Greece will not pass muster in the lender countries or with the lending institutions. So as I mentioned, these are the primarily the people who are involved. So there is something called the European Financial Stability Fund, European Central Bank, IMF, and somewhere indirectly Germany is the biggest affected party in Greek reform. So the reason why I think that this time the problem is not that severe as at the time of Lehman Brothers is that markets have had a long time to see this coming. It's not that if Greece has a bond with a face value of 100, that bond is trading in the market at 100. All those bonds are trading at huge discounts, maybe even half of the face value or even lower in some cases depending on maturity and so on. So a lot of the losses of the private players would also already have entered their books in terms of the mark-to-market requirements. It is not that it will be a complete shock. If it had happened the last time round, it would have been a complete shock for the global financial system. And secondly, as of now, there is no talk of contagion. The reason why still it is important to keep track of what happens is that this will be a template, this will be a formula which will be used for any future problem in any of the Eurozone countries. European Union does not have that long a history. This is the first time that a country and their charter does not allow for a country to come in and then exit from the currency. What happens if a country cannot meet its liability? There is no answer in the charter. It's the first time that this is happening, and what will happen now will be applied to any future case of financial difficulty in any other member countries. So what are the scenarios that could play out? One scenario is that Greece defaults on its liabilities to IMF, etc., but continues being part of the Eurozone and continues business as usual. So they keep fighting among themselves, but currency remains the same. So Greece will continue to pay salaries in euros, it will continue to raise taxes in euros, but it will say I am stopping payment of interest and principal to IMF, European Central Bank and so on. What will be the reaction of the lenders remains to be seen, but that is when people are saying June 30th is a crucial date. June 30th is a crucial date because on that day those liabilities are due. But does it mean that if liability is not paid on June 30th, on July 1st Greece stops functioning? They can continue functioning. They will technically be in default to IMF. But apart from that, nothing changes on July 1st. This is one scenario. The other scenario could be that the lenders start acting very tough. They say, the European Central Bank says, we will not support your banks at all, and you are on your own and you are not part of the Eurozone. In which case things turn extremely chaotic. So what happens in that case is that the Greek population will panic, will start or will continue to withdraw cash from their banks. In order to prevent a run on the bank, Greek government will say, close the bank branches, don't allow any withdrawals. We are declaring a bank holiday. They don't have euros to spend. So they say, instead of paying euros, now we will revert to our old currency and we will start making payments in the old currency. Old currency is what? It's a piece of paper. It will not have a value 1:1 surely of the euro. So how much discount will it trade at? Some people say it could trade at discount as much as 50% to the value of a euro. So maybe you would have 2 units of the new currency trading for 1 euro. In which case everyone in Greece takes a 50% pay cut effectively. Because of such severe loss of purchasing power with the population, they go into severe recession. That continues for 1 or 2 years maybe, but at the same time, everything becomes more attractive. So one thing which becomes attractive is tourism obviously, but that is after the riots and all calm down. But otherwise the difficult part for Greece is that they don't have too many companies exporting too much. So it's not an export-led economy. Their whole thing was borrow money in euros and spend. They have never figured out how to actually earn money or earn euros. So there will have to be some time before some sort of a export-led thing takes off or they start earning and they crawl back. So that will be the chaotic scenario. Today, despite this name calling, the Greece people calling IMF criminal and they say you are tax cheats and all of that, despite all that, they are still on talking terms. As we speak, they are meeting in Brussels, trying to work something out. So, most people are not expecting a disorderly breakdown or a disorderly default. People are expecting some sort of, everyone knows Greece cannot pay in full. There will have to be some element of kicking the can down the road, extending maturities, extending things. In fact, the European Central Bank has still not pulled the plug on the banks. Whatever run on the bank is happening, they are replenishing money and people are still able to withdraw funds from the bank. So, no one is expecting a disorderly bankruptcy. There will be some element of extending maturities, some compromise on the part of Greek government, which is raise some taxes, reduce some expenditure, and finally, very interestingly, while the Greek population is against austerity and against cost cutting, but at the same time, majority of the Greek people want to remain part of Eurozone. So somewhere they will arrive at a compromise. Very interestingly, there have been demonstrations in Greece trying to pressurize the government to arrive at some sort of a deal with the European Union rather than act too rigid. So hopefully we won't have too much of a panic kind of situation. But whatever happens now will be more important for the next crisis which comes as and when it happens. That was the talk for today. I'll be happy to take whatever questions you have.
So, if they don't get the bailout funds,
See the bank account
the salaries and governments on salaries.
So the bank account that the Greek government has with the European Central Bank or with whoever will have inflows coming in from taxes and from various things. Now out of its receipts, it has to decide whom to pay, whom not to pay. First thing they'll say is forget the lender. My PSU staff and my pensioners and all of those are more important to us. To hell with IMF. Now, when they say that, what is the reaction of IMF and European Central Bank remains to be seen. They may say we are freezing your account and we are not allowing you to touch your euro account or whatever. So far, no one has said that they would do that. So it depends. So it's like this. You have a monthly paycheck. Let's say 50,000 comes in your bank account every month. Your living expenses are 50,000. You don't have any surplus. At the same time, you have a due to your credit card company. Now, you may choose not to pay your credit card company, but doesn't mean you won't be able to pay your grocer or your milkman.
Revenues are enough to cover their.
If they are running a deficit of let's say 5% or 10%, they reduce the expenditure by 10%, but still they will be able to meet it. The bulk of the problem is the debt and the servicing of the debt. So obviously, if once they default, people will stop trusting them. Banks will not allow them to import because they will fear, will I get my payment? And there will be all sorts of complications. It's not that it's going to be simple, but what people fear is that it's like a time bomb. The moment the clock strikes 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. midnight of 30th June, suddenly Greece will explode. Nothing like that will happen. So despite all the brinkmanship and all the headlines and drama, you could come to a deal on 7th of July. In that 1 week, it's not that the earth will stop spinning.
Slight macro question. Now, you've shown Greece, but same thing is true technically for USA. Only thing is that they print the currency. Same thing is true for Japan. Only thing they print $1 trillion of the yen.
So US, UK, rest of the countries, the debt to GDP ratios are 100 minus something or whatever. No one is at 175, 180.
See,
Japan is at
nobody is cutting out. So point is the graph writing is on the wall. Same is true for Maharashtra government. And if you look at our stock market, there will probably be over 100 companies in the same state, including let's say a reputed company like Tata Steel for example. Now if you see a 40,000 crore or 45,000 crore debt, there is no way he can repay it. And just to keep that debt going, he will probably borrow more. So 10 years down the line, you don't see that debt ever coming to zero. It's like a perpetual borrowing which goes on going. So does this mean this scenario can continue in perpetuity, or is there any roadblock for this?
So there are two factors here. One factor is the absolute level of debt, and the other factor is ratio of debt to the underlying economy or underlying operations of a company. So if you look at a bank like let's say HDFC Bank, now their deposits have been growing year on year since the day the bank started, and a deposit is nothing but a liability or debt of the bank to its depositors. So are we worried about HDFC Bank? No, because we know that that money has been lent prudently to borrowers. Or the debt of let's say Reliance today will be far higher today than what it was 25 years back. But are we worried that it will default? Probably not, because their cash flows have improved. So when we talk about countries, even though the absolute level of debt is growing, as long as the underlying economy is growing and the economic activity is such that it can support that level of debt, people don't panic. Now that debt may get excessive in some years, then again they reduce the fiscal spending and bring it back, and finally they can monetize a portion of it, effectively printing money. So all those things can be done. Here, two factors. One is they can't print money. Second is the debt is too excessive. And third is because of the austerity and because of the whole situation, the economic growth itself will not be there and it could be negative. So confluence of these three factors creates that issue rather than just one factor.
Many companies also on the stock exchange, like
Companies-
Group, SR Group. So what happens to them 10 years down the line?
Companies have to
Same
go bust.
position as Greece.
Companies have to go bust, they have to sell the assets.
But you rightly put it, this Greece may be like a template, like for the future. Suppose even if they don't do default, they do some compromise. Maybe other country might take the, let us we can't do anything, they'll compromise. Right? Desperately, one signal. If they go away, compromise. If they don't go, let's give a signal. That's a dangerous one. Let us give voluntarily we withdraw or something like that. Otherwise,
Sure. So that is the primary reason why lenders are very careful in terms of not being seen as too lenient, because if this becomes an easy game, then a lot of people will be tempted to do the same kind of brinkmanship. If they take a tough stance, see anyway their money is stuck. Mentally, if they are prepared to write it off, they can act tough. If they are seen to be too lenient, then a lot of other countries will go down the same path.
Now, what is the consequence of Greece being expelled from European Union?
So, if it is expelled, the main consequence is on Greece. As of now, the consequence does not seem to be on the banking or financial system or the rest of Europe.
Yeah.
There will be a marginal 1 or 2% impact on the overall GDP. For Greece, it will be quite bad. There could be riots and stuff like that. There could be.
Why don't they do that, European Union? This is too much of a problem.
So, if they were to do it, the small question remains that. So, what has been happening is, once the European Union came into being, the spreads between bonds of different governments were very narrow. So, Spain would be able to borrow at rates similar to that of Germany, for example. Now, if each country left to its own devices, if that is the stance of European Union, then the financial markets will put every country's balance sheet under the microscope. Then the bond yields could certainly shoot up. Borrowing cost for a lot of countries could shoot up if Greece default were to happen or if they were to be expelled from the European Union. So far the stance has been that once a country enters the European Union, it will be there permanently. Then the whole question of that economic zone's existence will be at the
Such an
forefront.
extreme case like this, such an extreme case, it is so indiscipline and so chaos.
I have two observations. Actually, I came a little late presentation. This has been happening for a long time. This has not happened in the last 2 years. What question comes to my mind is that all these lending institutions, they are pretty astute bankers. First it was the bankers and it has now gone to these three entities, IMF and European Union and all that. Question is that why were they putting in money knowing fully well, they do a due diligence. Every time a bank gives you money, they do a due diligence. So how is it that this has been going on for the last 10, 12 years and they never bothered till it became a sort of a crisis a few years ago? That is the first thing which comes to my mind, which I think there's somebody is to blame somewhere. They've been getting loans from banks by maybe giving kickback to the bankers and like I know in India a lot of people get loans and knowing fully well that that money will never be repaid, and so some people in the bank are compromised by these middlemen and they get loans. I know a lot of case histories. That is one thing I wanted to ask you. Second thing, I have a general observation. You see, in this whole world, the largest economies like America and all that, they have played a very complex role in this world of allowing tax havens all over the world. Whether it is European Union, I'm not talking of Switzerland, but there are at least 300 tax havens all over the world. I mean, there are companies like Amazon paying 0.5% income tax or 1% and all that. So while they talk of good governance and corporate governance, all in the background, all over the world, money is moving around, trying to avoid the taxes in the country of its origin or whatever. So what I'm saying, there is a very big sinister plot of some people wanting to make money. With the result that today 85 people in this world have the same wealth as half the population of this planet. So what I'm saying is that whole exercise, and Greece has become a nut case, but it has been man-made. It's not been made by Greece alone. Others have also helped them to lay low. So these are the 2-3 observations I thought I'll just check with you.
Mine is an extension to his observation number 1. How did these great minds like German Chancellor, IMF, European Bank, European Bank, what were they thinking? How did they let the situation come to such extremes?
It was private profit, public loss. So it's exactly what happened in the subprime crisis. The subprime loans were on the private bank balance sheets, which had shareholders in. These were for-profit institutions. But when the crisis hit, the government had 2 options. One is let all these entities go bankrupt or save the financial system. Germany, European Union, European Central Bank had the same issue. Do you allow all the European banks to go bankrupt and withstand the resultant chaos, or you say that we will buy these bonds? So it's not that they lend, it's not that the German nation or European Central Bank or the European Union lent money out of their free will. They lent money in the last crisis to bail out Greece, to prevent a collapse of European financial system. First round, why did the smart bankers lend money? So bankers live quarter to quarter, year to year bonuses. If German bonds are giving you 1% and Greek bonds are giving you 3%, let's buy Greek bonds. As long as they don't default, we'll make money. And if they actually default, we would have encashed our bonus and gone home long back. And then finally, the government will come and bail us out. So that moral hazard is there. Effectively, it was a transfer of wealth from the general European population to the bankers.
How is the Indian market affected?
As such, no impact. So I think we need to observe this just out of curiosity rather than go very deep into it. So what will a Greek default do to ITC or Hindustan Unilever in India? Nothing. There's no direct impact. If there is a contagion, then overall environment becomes vitiated. You could see a slowdown in foreign investment. You could see sharp currency movements, and people who are dependent on exports could face a tough time. So impact will differ from company to company. As of now, no one is expecting a very big impact on global stock markets or on Indian markets in particular. If things get disorderly, some companies could face difficulties.
Whether you feel it's discounted kind of.
See, discounted or not discounted is difficult because we don't know whether it will be orderly or disorderly. If it is orderly, then it's already discounted. If it is disorderly and if European countries start sending armies to each other's country and they say we are going back to the old era where each country has its own passport and at each border there is immigration and we will have our own currencies, then I don't think people are prepared for that.
I think it's a very good opportunity because when that happens, the sentiments in the market become negative for a short time. So, like somebody said, it will be a good time to get into ITC.
To have a Jewish blood in
So that's the time because those companies, nothing has gone wrong, like what he says. Rajeev is right, but actually it's the right time to.
I'll go shopping home.
You go shopping. That's the time you take out all your crores of tax and put it into the market.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.